So again, some of the ways of using Twitter to help promote yourself and build your community. Um, a few tidbits on this also to use your compressed links that are available now to facilitate, especially since you're limited on as to your number of characters you can use in Twitter. Using the compressed links is helpful in that. Obviously, writing a headline or a comment that attracts attention and gives people a reason to click on it, and I would say also to retweet it. Both of those are important. But you should also, in that you tweet to give credit to others that are supporting your efforts. Other ways, overlapping a little bit with the last slide or the previous slide, using Twitter as a way to look for sources, find people who can answer questions, who can have some knowledge about what it is that you're working on. And this ask your sources directly. Once you find them, ask sources for their assistance or for their information. You can follow journalists from other communities that I mentioned. I think the story that as editor that I had my reporter and somebody else to do about the sale of alcohol to minors. That came from seeing it done elsewhere, and presuming that the liquor stores would not be aware. Wherever, I don't remember where it had been done elsewhere, but it was someplace that I figured that the liquor stores would not be aware or be prepared for a sting operation led by our newspaper to find that they were not checking IDs and so forth and selling alcohol to minors. And then when someone follows you, you can check to see if that's somebody you want to follow. Again, that's a way of building your sources, your network, and you can also check to see if you can check people that they follow. So you check to see whether you want to follow somebody that follows you, and you check who's following them. And again, in that process, build new sources and expand your network. And again, most of this, by the way, while this PowerPoint was created about Twitter, most of it can be applied also to Facebook and other social media with some slight modifications, obviously. So when I speak about Twitter, yes, this is specifically about Twitter, but it's really, in most cases, and can be adapted to any social media. Some other ways, again, specifically follow people in your feed. So if you have, let's say you're assigned by a newspaper or a TV station to regularly do the crime news. Well, if the sheriff or the police chief or somebody, the prosecuting attorney has a Twitter site, well, then you want to follow them. You want to not only to see what they're posting that might be of interest to your readers, but also to just build a relationship. It's one of the most important things as a reporter is to build relationships. And so if you, through social media, can build a relationship with somebody that is part of your beat, that is valuable in your reporting, then that's a very good thing to do. Already kind of covered in another slide is crowdsourcing. So does anyone know anything about fill in the blank? And so again, that's more or less what I said in a previous slide, but you can, anyway, you may be taking a little bit different perspective, what we would call crowdsourcing in our journalistic work. Getting story ideas. Now you can just ask directly, does anybody have any ideas on such and such? It might be in the form of, if you have a lot of people in your network from your own community, for example, is there anything in our community that you think is disturbing that should be improved? That sort of question, and see if anybody pops up with a story idea. You can also monitor the chats of other people in your, again, if you build your network and you have people in it that are potential sources and so forth, then you can monitor their chats, as I suggested already. Hopefully this can actually connect you in some cases to eyewitnesses of crimes or accidents or some sort of breaking news that could be of value to you. Who knows? They might even have photos. In a sense, when the tsunami hit Malaysia and Indonesia, some of the most valuable reporting was done by people using Twitter and other social media, because obviously you don't have a reporter sitting there on the beach waiting for a tsunami to hit. And so the most of the original reporting was done by citizen journalists, whether they called themselves that or not. It was citizen journalists who did that, and that's true of many other stories. In this day and age, citizen journalists, again, whether they know they're going to be journalists, are in essence a key part of our new journalism. You can also, with Twitter, drive people again to your blog posts, to your stories. And, one of the professionals suggested that by being limited to just a certain number of characters, it teaches you how to write more concisely, how to write more tightly. And that can be of value just as a skill, because a lot of people, especially young journalists, have a hard time saying a lot in few words, basically. Do you get some other examples of, and these are somewhat dated, but it gives some other examples of news that was tweeted. Um, in fact, right now, just recently, there's a lot of tweets, a lot of social media coming out of Iran, as people there are rioting and are upset about rising gas prices and so forth. So there's a lot of news coming out of Iran through social media. Uh, there was a few years ago when there was a movie about it where some birds flew into the engine of an airliner, and it had to land in a river by New York City in the Hudson River. And the first pictures, the first reporting came from citizen journalists. This is an accident, a wreck from Amtrak train. It's a little better view of it. And this was by a citizen journalist posting on Twitter. This was the airline that I mentioned landed in the river next to New York City. And again, a citizen journalist took this photo. And you also not just get photos, but you get some good quotes. Like this is one of the guys that was in the airplane. So you get some original reporting from people involved in news. There are some software that can help. One of them, for example, is called TweetDeck. It allows you to manage Twitter, in fact, manage multiple accounts in Twitter simultaneously. So if for some reason you want maybe a personal Twitter account and a professional Twitter account and so forth, you can set up more than one and manage all of them with one piece of software. It also does a better job of searching. It does a good job of searching and allows it's just easier to use than the standard Twitter face, although it also has improved over the years. So this is what TweetDeck looked like. So you see a lot of tools down the left side that you're able to use. And also like showing trends over in the right. So what's going on as a journalist, you can see what is trending, and by what is trending, that could lead to a news story, as well as your homepage, your various notifications, your messages, all easily visible here. And as I mentioned, if you Down here is a way of looking at more than one account at one time. Tweet poll is another. These kind of come and go. So I originally had a list of quite a few, many of which are no longer in existence. But TweetDeck and TweetPoll are both available, and this one has expanded to other social media where you can poll your followers on something, and again, that can be used very quickly and in a very positive way in doing your journalistic work. There are ethical considerations, like how do you identify yourself? And this may be where you have more than one account. You may have one account where it actually is to your advantage to stay somewhat anonymous, whereas in another account, you want to let people know that you're a reporter and what you're doing and be able to conduct your business like I've already discussed. So how do you identify yourself? How do you separate your personal, your professional Twitter feeds? That's very important. How do you verify information that you get on Twitter? That's obviously important. What language is acceptable as you're tweeting? And what, if any, opinions are okay? This is a very important issue. In fact, some people have gotten into some serious trouble in their jobs because they tweeted opinions that basically represent bad PR for their company, for their newspaper, for their TV station. And so you need to be very aware of what policies your organization has regarding your use of social media. And you do not obviously want to get on the bad side of your employer by tweeting things that are inappropriate. Right now, it's not tweeting, but you can see a similarity. Right now, part of what's going on in America is, relates to how much bias was there in the Justice Department and the FBI in investigating President Trump and some of his associates. And there just came out a report showing that there's whether you call it bias or not, it was beyond coincidental that some of the stuff that happened in pursuing a case against the president that never developed because apparently he wasn't guilty of anything. But some of the things they did was lie to a court to get a warrant. And one of the issues there is that they've been able to get a hold of tweets and emails and so forth between different, not so much tweets, there's more emails between different people that were involved in the investigation, which demonstrated very clearly their bias against the president. Well, imagine then putting that on Twitter. If they'd put that on Twitter, that would have gotten them in big trouble real fast. Now, they thought they were hiding it by doing email instead. Obviously, after all this scandal, even if somebody in the government wants to get the president, they will probably figure out that we better not be using email because that can be accessed by our opponents. So they're going to figure out new ways like they may have to use a telephone or something and not make sure it's not being recorded. So these are some of the things to consider in social media, how to use it as a journalist. In promoting yourself and seeking new sources and even gathering direct evidence or information like the photos of this breaking news and comments by people involved in the breaking news. Okay, that's all I have for that. Okay, and here are, I just left the same front page because I was too big a hurry, but I changed the headline on it. So I'm going to review some of the things that some other journalists besides Jim Polk have told me as I've interviewed them over the years, other award-winning journalists. I will use some original audio from my interviews with them, but I also have slides to summarize what I think are the key aspects of it. The first one I want to review is Peter Fleeth. He won his Pulitzer Prize working for the Portland Oregonian in the state of Oregon. It's the biggest newspaper in the state of Oregon in America, and it's kind of hard to read all of this, but and it's not really that important. It won't be in the. I mean, who he's affiliated with might be important. All that other small type is certainly not important. He did win his Pulitzer Prize covering a story about a family called the Kim family. The father was, I'm not sure, Asian anyway. And, his wife and his two children in 2006 were driving back home from visiting people in Oregon. And whether it was a shortcut or whatever, they took a road that led them up in the mountains, and then during a blizzard, they got stuck there. And they had cell phones, but up in the mountains there was no cell phone coverage. Subsequently, he ended up dying trying to walk for help. The newspaper covered this. It had lots and lots of stories about what happened, not only while they were looking for them, because there was a massive hunt. Where did this family go? What happened to them? So their relatives, told authorities that these people are missing. What happened? And so they had this massive hunt covered by the newspaper and trying to figure out where they went, what happened to them. And then afterwards, covering the issue of what do we do about this in the future? It turned out that there was technology that could, in fact, they ultimately did use some cutting edge technology to figure out that where they were at, that they were trying to call and their calls were not getting out, but they were still recorded in a database that somebody was trying to make a call. So even though they could not successfully make a call, if authorities had known that there was a technology that would allow them to recognize, failed calls and the location of failed calls, they could have saved the family entirely. As it turned out, the father died walking out and trying to find help. His wife, Katie, was able to save the children partly because she was still breastfeeding the youngest one, and so she breastfed both of her children and was able to keep them nourished enough to survive until help arrived. So again, this started in December, so about 13 years ago was when they got lost and stranded up in the mountains of Oregon. So one of the things that I'm going to go ahead and try to play his original audio as we go. As I try, I'm hoping it'll allow me to simultaneously show these. Just a second, I'm going to try to do that.
Perhaps in reflecting back on what you've learned over these 25 years or so of your career, perhaps you could tell us some keys to succeeding in journalism, whether they relate to writing or interviewing or reporting techniques. What are some keys that I should be teaching my students? Well, first of all, they shouldn't even be considering journalism if they don't have a passion for public service. Because ultimately, that's what it is. It is
nothing more than social work. And if you don't have a compassion for people and for society and for the workings of democracy, you should not be involved in it, because that was the only reason to be involved in it. To stay a journalist for decades and decades requires great tenacity. It never pays enough. It sounds romantic when you're 22, but when you're 42 and have 4 children and a wife at home, and you have to pay the bills, and you're still not making enough money, even though you're doing something you love, you have to have a great tenacity and a great belief in the importance of what you do. That's number one. You have to have that above all things. After that, it's like being a carpenter. You need to learn very well how to build a wall, how to pound a nail, and that involves learning how to interview people and not be afraid to ask hard questions, how to write a story. This is not fiction. You don't need to be John Updike. You don't need to be Ernest Hemingway. All you need to do is learn the tools to construct the story. And that's all you're doing. It's just craft work, it's not art. Once you get those tools, and I say, if you find a great editor, 2 or 3 in my life, you want to attach yourself to those editors. If you find a great writer that you can make a friend, attach yourself. If you can't do that, great writers in paper and cut their stories out and read again and again how they wrote them, how they constructed them, where they took their words, where they put their emphasis. Learn how to do it. And remember, you're a carpenter. You're not Picasso. If you think you're Picasso, if you think you're an artist, if you think you're great, your words are going to come out looking like a Picasso painting, and nobody can deal with that. You have to think of yourself as a craftsman and learn the tools of being a craftsman, how to interview correctly, how to write a story correctly, how to go into the field with enough money in your pocket, credit cards in your pocket, that you don't have to come home if you run out of money when you're in the middle of the desert in Arizona and you need $50 in cash to have it. I mean, all of these things are just tools you learn, and you want to pick the absolute best teachers you can find out in the field to teach you that. And they're all willing to help you and teach you if they see that you're sincerely interested in becoming a really good newspaper man or woman.
What are some of the tips that you give students on interviewing?
Well, I think honesty is important. You need to be honest with people about what you're there for. That said, there are certain techniques you can use. I remember somebody had told me that there is an art to an interview, that you want to come in, be friendly, try to get people to open up, talk about their, if you're in their office, the artwork they have on the walls, pictures of their children, you want to talk with them, get them to open up and speak with you, and then the art of the interview goes higher and higher, and you're beginning to find the information you want. About midway to 2/3 through that interview, you want to hit them with a really hard question. You want to be as mean as you're going to be. You want to ask them to say, rob the bank, whatever. But by the end of the interview, you want to leave them smiling. And the reason you want to do that is because you're usually going to need to come back. And you do not want to leave somebody with a bad taste in their mouth. You want to leave somebody believing that they had an honest, fair chance to be heard. And it's best to do that by asking the hardest question somewhere between the middle and the end. But by the end, you want to go back with a nice stuff, complimenting them on whatever. There's no tricks like that for interviewing. There's funny tricks people have about when you're scared of interviewing someone, you're afraid of them. Somebody told me once, you always envision that person sitting on the toilet, and you would in that way take your fear away. For me, it's the idea of a bullet lump on my head. You want to go up on the toilet. You have to find little tricks to help you feel brave and to feel smart and to feel in control. There's other things, tape recorders are needed sometimes, and if you can use them, they're great. Now there's digital recorders that are very reliable, but you still want to take notes the whole time in case your tape recorder quits working. You have the time, which most recorders don't. It's nice when you're interviewing someone to come to them the first time without a tape recorder or a piece of paper. And just walk with them, talk with them, and just get a sense of who they are. Next time you come back, you might bring a pad of paper. And the third time you come back, you might bring your paper quarter and your pad of paper. And you build up trust and credibility. And this isn't meant to trick anyone. It's meant to give you both a level of comfort in talking. Now, sometimes interviews are more combative than that. Then you just got to be steely and tough and sit there and be able to dish as well as receiving. And those things just take time and learning, and it's important to be conscientious of each interview and think about what you're doing, think about what you're learning, and you get that. I always came back and listened to tapes and thought, I talk way too much, like I am right now. And talking too much is usually a great weakness for my reporter. It's better to just shut up and listen.
Just kind of summarizing the first two. This one's obvious. We've talked about that before. The first one, I think a couple of comments he made that are important is he looks at journalism as a trade almost, not as a, I mean, I would say it's been a big effort on the part of journalists in America to be able to call themselves professionals, not, that's a profession, not a trade. But he's kind of emphasizing the other side of it, that you don't have to be Hemingway to be a good journalist, because we're trying to write simple. We're trying to just give the facts, make it as clear as possible. That does not require being a novelist level writer. It's pretty simple. And in fact, as a journalist, as I've mentioned before, I believe the biggest trouble you can get yourself into is to try to think that you're Hemingway or to try to sound smart when all you really need to do is tell the facts and let the facts, if you've gathered good facts, if you've been a good reporter, then that makes you a good writer because you're giving facts that are of interest to people. And so they will judge you by the information you're providing them, not by the wonderful writing. Now, that doesn't mean there are some that are wonderful writers, and they've won Pulitzer Prizes also by being wonderful writers, particularly like feature writers are a lot different than reporters are in the quality of their writing and the way they approach their stories in many cases. Same with an opinion writer, a commentary writer is somewhat different. And so they do sometimes, a lot of times, make mistakes by not being a good reporter. A good commentary writer is also a good reporter. They give the public good information, and they depend more on their information than they do. I mean, they maybe have to be a little bit better writer than a reporter, but I don't know, that'd be debatable. But again, the biggest mistake that a commentary writer, an editorial writer, whatever you want to call them here, makes is thinking that they don't have to provide facts, that they can carry the commentary with the glory of their words, whereas their most powerful ally is facts, is information. And so he sees it as almost more of a trade than a profession from his perspective. I mean, I think it is kind of both. I agree with him. I've said this, and I have it in my crash course that I published, that you do have to learn the hammer and nails. He used the same analogy, the hammer and nails of the business. If you understand the hammer and nails, how to do the work as a tradesmith, so to speak, then you can be a really good reporter without being a great writer, because it isn't that difficult. You're trying to simplify things for your readers. And so you just have to be a good 8th grade writer, basically, in order to tell your story. You do have to have the right motivation, as he said. He sees it as almost being a social worker, like a welfare worker or something, because you are looking out after the welfare of your readers and providing them the information they need in a democracy or in any society, the information they need to be happy, to be successful. So that's true even of non-democracies. In a sense, they may not have the freedom they'd like to have to help in the ways they'd like to help. Nonetheless, they can help their society by providing valuable information, even if it's not related to government function, many times.
How about documents? What are some tips you can give us as far as getting government records and other documents that are important to the story?
Documents are an ironclad way to make your case and print it in paper without being sued. They're critical to really good reporting. In the United States, we have fairly good laws that allow us as journalists and the public access to public documents. That's really, really important to have those laws, and you have the opportunity to fight for those laws in your legislature or your Congress or the Parliament to make sure that the public has access to the public's business. Any way you can get documents is fair game in my book. Whenever I speak to a group of students or an interest group or anything like that I speak with, and I talk about investigative reporting, I always say documents are key for us. Your word, your version of the event is important, and we may or may not be able to use it publicly in the press, depending on the legal situation. You can almost always use documents, so if you have any, you can send them in plain brown letter, envelope, I don't need to see you become a threat. You always want to get documents that verify that somebody said if you can. Documents are the gold standard. You can government documents that can be authenticated. You need to be careful that they're not fakes and that you haven't been tricked. That does happen. I know reporters who make their career being called document reporters, where all they did was go after documents to become a great reporter. Bob Woodward, former of the Washington Post, known far and wide for his Watergate reporting, he started ahead as a great document reporter. His documents to back up as much of his interviewing. You can't say too much about getting all the documents. Any way you can, serve the people.
I think the important part of that comment is, oops, again, just emphasizing the tradesmith side of it, you might say, is that many reporters have won, Pulitzer Prize and stuff just on their ability to get documents. I think every society has some access to documents, even in those that are not fully democratic. There are ways to get some documents, maybe more limited than in America. In America, again, there's a process, and sometimes people in the government try to block the process. But there's a organization called Judicial Watch, for example, and they've gotten thousands of documents showing the inappropriate functions of government, um, and they've been doing that for decades now. They sometimes have to go to court because the government will say, no, those documents don't exist, and they will have evidence that they do exist, and they have to go to court, and the judges say, okay, we know that you're not telling us the truth here, so go find those documents. I don't know why some of those government lawyers haven't been sent to prison for lying to the courts, but in some cases that's what it comes down to, is that the government lawyers even are lying to the courts because they do not want to provide those documents. It's embarrassing to somebody that they're trying to protect. And so it's even in America, in a democracy, um, there are laws that allow them to go to court and fight to get documents that the government tries to block them from getting. And the law, provides for that. So in America, it becomes fairly easy. It's easy in the sense there's a law to help the reporters. It's not easy because government officials themselves try to block it. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to have to do the work. They might just be lazy. Whatever it is, it's going to show bad light on a politician they like, so they don't want to hurt the politician. So they try to make up an excuse not to give the documents. They use all sorts of tactics to try to not do what the law says they have to do, even in America. That's part of what we're calling the deep state, is that the government in America is mostly controlled at the bureaucratic level by people who, for example, disagree with Donald Trump. And so there's people at the bureaucratic level that are illegally illegally providing documents to the media, for example, to try to hurt Donald Trump. On the other hand, they're illegally blocking people like Judicial Watch from getting documents that would hurt their side. So it's, like I say, it's not just a problem in a communist country or a dictatorial country in getting documents. It is in a democracy as well, because you have people of political leanings that want to protect their side. And if one side especially gets control of the government at the bureaucratic level, it doesn't really matter who the president is. The president in America doesn't have the power to fire everybody because he's now the president. Doesn't have that power. There's a law called the Civil Service, and so people, once they get into civil service, it's very difficult to get them out of government, even if they do things like that. Even if they lie and break the law, it's hard to get them out of the government. So in every case, there's difficulties. But for example, I think I mentioned before, there was a reporter in New York for the Village Voice, and for some of those, that's where I met him, was as a reporter for the Village Voice, or an editor, I think he was. But he went and got documents, and this I think you could do in a communist society, for example, even as protective as it might be of scandals and things. You might find government documents. They might give you access to government documents of people who were penalized or found guilty of doing certain things, like not keeping up the quality of their apartments that they were renting out, something like that. And that's one of the things that this Village Voice editor was doing, was finding documents that the government had no reason to hide from them, yet no other reporters were doing it. And so they were able to get the documents and write stories about slumlords, what they're called in America, people that own apartments but don't take care of them properly, or other trends in judicial judgments that they could find.
If you could kind of show us why you did go into journalism and what you have enjoyed about it and what things you haven't enjoyed about your career.
I went into journalism because it was a way, at the time, when I was young, I thought I wanted to be a writer. And I thought being a journalist was a way to become a writer, and it can be. But I also wanted to do it because I really wanted to help people. And I thought it was a great way to help people and to give me a chance to do something that mattered in society that I otherwise wouldn't have been allowed to do. That has been a great joy of being a journalist, of being able to change my world in small ways. I mean, I can't claim everything I ever did electrified the world, which will change anything that anybody will ever remember before. But I know, and the people that I wrote about and changed the world for, they know. That is an immensely satisfying way to make money. Now that said, the money in journalism is poor and it's getting worse. The worst part of being a journalist is you don't make enough money. You never make enough. When you're a financial writer, which I was for a number of years, you cover Wall Street, you cover stocks, you cover bonds, you see great deals. You go, man, I could buy the stock to make the money, but you can't. That's a conflict of interest. You're never allowed to participate. You have to stay on the sidelines and watch. And that, I think, is the hardest thing about the industry. You have to prepare yourself for a world where you're not going to make a lot of money. There's exceptions to that, but there's not many. But again, that said, they're able to raise a nice family, a nice home, everybody's healthy, relatively happy, can't complain. I would much rather have done this than have been a carpenter my whole life.
In this part of the world, it can sometimes be dangerous to be a journalist. There have been literally dozens in the Russia and the CIS countries who have been killed for things they've written. And so here I am trying to teach people to become journalists in a situation where indeed there have been some people killed locally. any advice or insights to share with somebody in this situation?
Well, the man I was asking you about at the beginning of the thing, died over in Egypt, trying to teach young journalists how to properly cover a political election. And it brings me to tears thinking what journalists do in countries in your neck of the woods and all over the world, where they have to die for stories. And a certain amount of that, I guess, is necessary. But as practical advice I would tell any young journalist, whether they're in Kazakhstan or Egypt or Russia or the United States, the no story is worth dying for. Do not go there. You do not need to die for a story. There's better ways to go at a story. Some of the techniques you can use on a very practical level, and if you know that contractors built a bridge badly, and that the bridge collapsed and killed 20 people, but if the contractor is connected to the president of the country, and if you write about this story, it could bring ruin to you, your family, maybe death. Maybe you shouldn't write that story. It doesn't mean you need to run away from the story. People that behave in that manner, that is, exploit the people for their own gain, do it in many, many ways. Maybe you go back and look at 5 projects they did that never killed anybody, but may have defrauded the people monetarily. Maybe you go back and look at how they started their career. Did they steal? Did they whatever? There's ways to approach stories from the pick at the outside of it rather than jump right into the heart. You never need to die for a story. That does nothing for anyone except to be very irritating. And I just cannot advocate it on a real basis. I'd be always pleased to say that's wonderful. I just don't see dying for a story. I don't think that's right. I think there's always smarter ways to try to figure out how to expose the injustice rather than sacrificing your own life. The problems with public construction, the problems with the bidding process, the problems with how public money is spent on public projects, and there's just a lot of ways to think about stories without putting your head on the chopping block. It's easier to put your head on the chopping block in the democracy of the United States where journalists don't get killed. It's very rare to be able to get hurt over here. We have a strong system of government laws that protect us. That's not true in a lot of nations. And I recognize that, and it takes even more courage to be a journalist there. And you have to be 10 times more careful in those countries. Maybe you should reach out to the International Journalism Organization. There's a lot of them that watch very closely what happens to journalists in different countries. And try to get the support and help of your comrades and other nations. In this day and age of the internet, it's much easier to reach those people. You don't have to be alone. Each and every one of your students does the best of luck at changing your own peaceful world.
Well, again, this was something that came up when I was working in Kazakhstan. Right after I got there, of course, Kazakhstan is one of the former Soviet republics, and actually, right before I got there, somebody was abducted. She not actually wouldn't be counted in this list because they never found her body, but it's been more than 10 years now since she disappeared, and so I think we can presume that she's no longer alive. This person here, the picture of the gal here, is is the 4th journalist for a newspaper called Novaya Gazeta in Moscow, who was killed in a fairly short period of time. And as you see on the list, in that period of time from 1992 to 2008, in this particular PowerPoint, I did not update these numbers. But you see, during that time, of course, was a very deadly time. There were 136 reporters killed in Iraq. But other places weren't a lot safer, even when they weren't at war. Like Russia was, almost 50 people killed during that period of time, 50 journalists killed during that time, including these 4 from Novaya Gazeta. Places like the Philippines, Colombia, and South America, Pakistan. A lot of places it's very dangerous to be a reporter. One of the things, the thing that he was trying to emphasize here is that there are ways to tell your story and maybe not get killed for it. I think one of what he was saying about, for example, if a bridge collapses and you can take a look, without naming names, you can take a look at other structures that were built by that same company and identify the failures of their structures without necessarily even mentioning their name. That this was not the first structure that failed because of this company cut corners, for example. Might be a way of getting the government's attention that this company was, they should do something about it. And even in a country that is dictatorial or something that's that represses this sort of news in lots of ways, if you were to get too specific, you could perhaps write stories along that line without naming names, but naming events that ended up with somebody who was paying attention going back to the same bad actor, so to speak. All right, go then to another reporter, Lee Capola. Let me go to the next slide and tell you a little bit about Lee. I don't expect you to know all this stuff either, but I'll give you a short version of Lee. He started off as a print reporter for one of the larger newspapers in America, the Buffalo News. And he won a lot of prizes. He did not win the Pulitzer that I know of, but he won other prizes, Associated Press prizes and so forth. And he gained a very positive reputation, especially in his coverage of the mafia, of organized crime. I think I may have mentioned him before. Anyway, I got to know Lee, actually was one of my colleagues in my first university job as an assistant professor at SUNY is the, when I refer to SUNY, it's the State University of New York. And so that's actually what's called, they have lots and lots of universities underneath that. So I was at the College of Buffalo, and that's where he started his career as well as an academic. So he's probably, based on his graduation from college, he was, somewhere like 10 years older than me. Was a very interesting and fun person to talk to. Great personality. He after he joined the SUNY, what we call SUNY College of Buffalo, about the time I actually left there, he then went on and became the dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at St. Bonaventure University, which is a Catholic university, one that actually graduated from. But anyway, so I'll proceed with some of his audio and some summaries of what he's going to talk about.
We developed I have not shied away from using street language when I talk to people who understand street language. I don't shy away from throwing in an Italian word or two and talking to someone who's Italian who understands it because they develop an affinity for you, a closeness to you. On occasion, when I'm talking to people who don't want to give me information, I often give them wrong information, phony information, so that they will feel obligated to correct me. I will insinuate that I know a lot more than I really know.
and I will rattle off all this information that I know is damaging to that person. And you'll be surprised how many times people will come back to correct you with something you have no idea what it's all about. Because they want to make sure that as long as you know that, you're going to get it right. But they would have never told you anything unless you told them a lot of wrong things. And it's just a tactic that you use. It's kind of like, well, all right, Mr. Smith, when did you stop beating your wife? Oh, geez, I don't beat my wife. I did hit her 2 weeks ago. I mean, and that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
When you're interviewing somebody and they request total confidentiality or who's handling it, how do you handle that situation?
You're talking about off the record? Is that what you mean by this?
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's talk about it in two ways, because it's very easy to give someone, well, first of all, the first thing I do is I tell someone, hey, listen, the information you may give me, I may already know. So I'm not going to go off the record with you, because then if I use that information because I already know it, you're going to tell me, hey, I told you that off the record. And no matter how much I tell you I got it from somebody else, you're not going to believe it. So some people, believe it or not, out there in that cruel world, some people actually use off the record to protect information they know you already have. Because they say to you, is this off the record? And if you are not sharp enough to caution you or granting of an off the record comment from them, then what will happen is they then throw a blanket over your information because they have said this is off the record and you've granted it off the record. So you've got to put that little nugget in there and say, hey, listen, if I already know it, it's not off the record. And of course, that doesn't mean when he tells you you don't know it, you can't say, oh, I already knew that. That's another tactic you might use to get information. One thing I do not do, and I would never do, is I would never burn a source. I would never attribute something to someone who asked me not to. If I feel the information is so valuable, I need the information. If I believe my source and can check on the information, which I do occasionally, I will never burn a source. In fact, I have gone so far as, and many reporters do this, I know of for a fact, but we have information from a public figure, say, and the public figure says, listen, that can't come from me. And the only way you can use it is if you print me and say, I refuse to comment on that. So very often we'll see a story that will come from a federal or state or a city official that deals with that person's department. And the information will be laid out from a source, and then a district attorney, a mayor, a county executive refuse to comment. Well, a real reporter knows that 9 times out of 10, that's who gave me the information in the first place. And refusing to comment is a cover your ass statement that the reporter has agreed to put in. And if the story is valuable enough, I will agree to that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Because basically what you're doing is you're protecting someone's job and or reputation in the interest of getting a story that you believe the public should get. So that's one way I treat it. Now, in television, it's much more difficult because when someone says, I need anonymity or confidentiality, you can't really put them on television and say, this person you're about to see, I granted anonymity to. So it's a much more difficult thing in television reporting than it is in newspaper reporting to keep your sources confidential. So many stories I was able to write as a newspaper reporter because I knew my sources were good. And I didn't have to know anything more than that. And I would write the story quoting my sources. As a television reporter, too often you have to show your sources. And that's a difficult thing to do.
You were talking a while ago about stories in the mafia. Have you ever been threatened by the mafia?
I don't think I've ever been threatened, you're going to get yours, you're going to wind up in the lake with some shoes type threats. But it has been hinted to me that I have made a few people angry in the course of my years of reporting on the mafia. I know my neighbor, at one time when I was doing a series of articles on a mafia person, I was out cutting the lawn, it was during the summer, and he came over and he said, Lee, I'm going to put a huge arrow on my house pointing to yours, and I'm going to write on the arrow, Coppola lives here, because if they throw the bomb, I don't want to get the wrong house. So I want to make sure they get the right house when they throw the bomb. No one has ever thrown a bomb. My wife and my family are very upset when I write about the mafia, when I report about the mafia. And I know that I have, as I said, angered some people. It has been reported to me that people in the underworld have gone so far as to try and take up a collection and hire a private investigator to find out bad things about my background that they can brandish all over the Buffalo area to discredit me as a person. So then I would not be able to discredit them as members of the underworld. That has not happened, but I have been told that has been talked about.
Have you ever, in your dealings with the mafia, gotten yourself in a situation where you were just downright scared, right?
Well, I think a couple of times. I know that I was interviewing one mafia person once who was mad at a story I had written, and I asked for the interview, and we set up the interview in a neutral place. Actually, it was a home of a policeman who he knew and who I knew. The policeman also happened to be my cousin, which is another way of getting to people when you need to get to them. And I walked into the door, and although the policeman was there with his family, the mafia person grabbed me by the throat and said, I didn't like that article you read. He pulled me into him. He had this fire in his eyes, and I didn't like that article you wrote about me. He said, if you had been there when I read it, I would have killed you. And I knew he wasn't kidding. And I got that very cold chill up and down my but I was scared. He would have killed me if I had been there when he read the article. I know that there's a story I tell involving a fellow reporter of mine from the news when I was with the news by the name of Tony Cardinale. We were doing a series of articles on the godfather of Buffalo, a man by the name of Stefano Magadino, who is now dead. And we had written the articles, and we thought they were the best piece of journalism we had ever done because it examined this person as a human being. We did so much checking of people who knew him, and we built a personality portrait of this man to show him the human being side of him. And when we submitted the articles, our editor at the time said, well, did you ever interview Magadino? And we kind of asked him, introduce Magadino. We had tried, in fact, to interview Magadino. We had written letters to his attorney asking for interviews. We had written letters to his attorney asking him to answer specific questions from us in writing. We got no response. And our editor told us at the time, he said, well, did you ever knock on his door and ask for him? And we kind of looked at him and said, are you, screwy? You don't just go up to Stefano Magadino's door and knock on his door and say, Mr. Magadino, we're two reporters from Buffalo News, and we would like to interview you. Can you tell us about your 50 years of killing people, please? But, he said, until you do that, your story isn't very valid, because people in their minds are going to say, well, why didn't they try and interview that one who's out? Sometimes the most outrageous ideas make sense. And the thought, the possibility, the mere remote, minuscule possibility that Magadino would actually allow us to come into his house and be interviewed kind of excited us as journalists because we said, my God, if he lets us in the house, do you realize we'd be the first journalist ever to interview a mafia chieftain? I mean, this is a thing the FBI said at one time was the #1 criminal in the United States. He was the boss of bosses. He ruled La Cosa Nostra. So with that in mind, he set out for his home in Lewiston. And it was a cold January day, as I recall. We drove along the Niagara River, and we were joking and laughing as we drove up the freeway. And we went over the first grade island bridge, and we were laughing and joking about, our stupid dudes were good. We went over the second grade island, and we were joking and laughing so much anymore because we were being very close to Lewiston. And we pulled out of the street that we lived, and
Journalistic jobs are dangerous, even in America. The mafia being one of those. A number of years ago, organized crime killed a reporter in Arizona, and in order to teach the mafia lesson, all the major newspapers in America sent a reporter to Arizona to try to figure out who had killed the reporter. And so they decided, in order to keep the mafia from doing that again, we, as all of the media, all the major media, have to go in and find the killer and make sure he gets convicted. And so they did that. They put a multi-newspaper team together, went to Arizona and finally got all the information they needed to convict the person who had done the killing. And so I don't know that there's ever been a killing since then. But the other thing that by the mafia, the other thing, however, he mentions here is something I'm also familiar with, that even if the mafia does not kill you, they might try to destroy your reputation. Um, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this class. I'm not sure this would have been relevant. But the first job I had out of college, I became the editor of a 120,000 circulation newspaper in Tampa, Florida. And it just so happens that this is in Buffalo, New York, when I got to know Coppola, and that's where he was doing his work. But so it turns out that the mafia in Buffalo, New York, have their winter homes in Tampa, Florida, where I was at. So I lived in the two places where this organization of mafia had their homes were in the two places I worked. I suppose FBI might be getting suspicious of why I'm following around going after the FBI or the mafia. Anyway, so their winter homes were in Tampa, where I worked first, and then their summer homes are in Buffalo, where I worked my first professorial job. Um, I assisted a former cop in a race to become mayor of Tampa, and I helped him a lot. But the person uh, that he was running against was somebody who had become a multimillionaire while he was in public office, and that doesn't happen by accident. They have to be manipulating something somehow. And it turned out later that he had a lot of money into porno filmmaking. In other words, the suspicion is that person was very close to the mafia. Um, Things happened then and later to demonstrate that the mafia was very involved in trying to block my candidate from becoming mayor because he was too honest, and he was an ex-cop. So they did a number of things during that election to try to stop him, to try to destroy his reputation. For example, uh, my candidate had been a cop in New York City, and he was trying to become a detective. And so, for a police officer to become a detective, they have to do something extra special. And so, he tried to infiltrate organized crime in New York City. And once he made his move to try to get into the organization, so he could do some undercover work, the way that this branch of the organized crime kept cops from doing it is they made them strip naked and pose for photos. Um, and so, anyway, this my candidate did that when he was a cop in New York, and and so when he was running for mayor of Tampa 10 years later, suddenly a magazine came out with his nude photos in it. And so it was pretty obvious, and the way it happened, there's other aspects to it, made it obvious that organized crime was trying to destroy his reputation so he couldn't become the mayor of Tampa. He won more than 60% of the precincts. Precincts are the local area where you vote, places where you vote. He won more than 60% of the precincts and still somehow won or somehow lost the election by 200 votes. Um, and a lot of that had to do with the mafia. So he later on then won a position as county commissioner, and then he was framed for arson, which made no sense. But anyway, they found somebody to swear that he had started a fire as a way to get some money to pay for his wife's medical bills or something, and he had actually ended up in prison. I mean, I can't say absolutely 100% sure that he was innocent, but I am sure he was innocent. That he was framed by the mafia because they did not want somebody like him in public office in a position that could hurt their business. So again, that's what they would do nowadays because they actually have learned that killing people is not sometimes the best way of destroying somebody. That there are better ways of doing it from their perspective. Okay, the last one I want to introduce you to is Bill Marimow. He was one of the few reporters to ever win two Pulitzer Prizes. He won one. He worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer for 21 years, and then left it for a while, and then came back and became the editor and vice president of the company. So he was the Philadelphia Inquirer was his baby, so to speak. Anyway, he won in 1978. He won the Pulitzer Prize for public service. Reports on police abuse of power in how they were treating suspects and so forth. 1985, he won investigative reporting. The investigative reporting Pulitzer Prize for police dogs attacking 350 people, most of whom were not criminals. Excuse me. So anyway, so he's again one of the few that has won two Pulitzer Prizes. So I hope we can get most of this in before we have to take the quiz.
With us, I have, okay. Thank you to the students we have with us today. We have Marimow, the Philadelphia Inquirer, 1978 Pulitzer Prize winner. Let's start out, if I could ask, how would you define investigative or enterprise reporting, and perhaps in defining it, describe some of the key methods involved with it?
Okay. What I did was to kind of correlate my own thoughts with the thoughts of Bob Greene, who's an editor at Newsday, and he wrote an introduction for a textbook by Clark Mullenhoff called Investigative Reporting. And I'm going to quote from his introduction, and then I'll kind of amplify on his brief definition. And he says, I quote, investigative reporting is subject to definition. It is the reporting through one's own work product and initiative that is of importance.
With us, I have, okay. The sake of the students we have with us today, we have Marimow, the Philadelphia Inquirer, 1978 Pulitzer Prize winner.
Well, I see that I thought I had all the audio for this, but it doesn't appear I do. So I'll continue and tell you more of what cover the parts, particularly that you need on the quiz. The rest of his interview is on a different hard drive than I have with me, so I can't access that here. Okay. Okay, well, I'll just share his story based on the PowerPoint then. So the three things that he says are important in defining investigative reporting. You can look at it from a perspective of the work you do, but that doesn't really define it. So I mean, yes, you do. It is a harder piece of reporting. Let me turn back to. You spend more time at it over a longer period of time. It's tougher, and all those are characteristics, but it's not what defines it. It does have to be original work. It has to be significant work, according to Marimow, and it needs to uncover something that someone's trying to hide. And that's probably the most important part. Is if somebody was not trying to hide it, then it would probably be in a category of breaking news or something else. It would not be investigative reporting. And so that's probably the most important bullet item is it's something somebody's trying to hide, which is why it's more difficult. Why you have to ask more, talk to more people, look for documents, do all the other stuff that you need to do to try to force out the information in a way that is usable for a news medium. Because somebody, whether it's somebody in the government, somebody in business, somebody is trying to hide that information because it's going to hurt them or hurt their friends or whatever. So it's kind of again, I've kind of mentioned some cases already, even in this investigation of Trump, where people are trying to hide information from those who would want to protect Trump, or they're trying to release information to try to hurt him, and they're doing it anonymously. So they're using the media in that case in an inappropriate way. And many of the cases where they have done that, they've been proven to be lying, or at least being misrepresenting the truth. I talked to him about using unnamed sources. We already heard from some other people on that subject. But his rules is, first off, is it critical to the story? Do I really need to use this unnamed source in order to do the story? If there's and are there again any other sources that I can go to get the same information? If there's not, then even if you accept it, a key that he said that I think a lot of current reporters are not living by, when there's an accusation against somebody, can you at least substantiate the accusation? Can you at least substantiate that? Even if you can't substantiate some other aspects of what the person's saying, at least the key, if they're saying somebody's committed a crime, for example, are there other ways that you can substantiate that so that it's fair to the person they're accusing? That, like I say, is one of those things that is not being done properly now. When a source, you let them be unnamed if the source would suffer injury if discovered. Now that injury is not necessarily physical injury, but it would destroy their job. It would do something that would cause them harm if you gave their name. And you do have to tell them that you will review or reveal their name to other people in the news staff. I think I mentioned before there were cases, including a Washington Post case where somebody just made up the story. That's after those embarrassing situations where people, like the one I said with the Washington Post, the young lady actually won a Pulitzer Prize, and then it came out that she seemed to be that she had lied in her resume and stuff like that. So they took her into a room and basically browbeat her until she confessed that she had never interviewed anybody. She made up the interviews. And while she wrote well, it wasn't true. Now, her argument was, well, it's true. It's just not necessarily. I mean, I know it's true because I know this is happening to these young kids in the hard part of town, but she didn't actually go and interview anybody. So even though she knows the background, she happened to be African American. She was familiar with some of the bad parts of big cities, so she had some personal familiarity with it. But that still does not justify making up a person and saying that you interviewed them and making up their quotes and making up it was a fiction story. It was not a true story. And so after some episodes like that, then it became standard operating procedure. I don't know that it's still true. It should be. If it's not, that at least the editor has to know who you're interviewing. At least the editor. They still, as part of the promise, the editor isn't going to reveal the name either. But the editor, somebody else needs to know, and so that and the editor may require a meeting with the source, for example, in order to know if the source really exists, and to be persuaded that what he's providing the reporter is true. Now, again, I don't think enough of that is going on now, that they've stopped doing some of that. I'm going to go backwards a second and go back to Coppola. I don't think I talked that I covered some of this with him. Um, he did say, for example, he said, don't, you can't ever give the name of a source if you promise not to. And I told you in the last class that may mean you may have to go to jail. Because if in your state they don't have a protection of journalist sources, then the judge can say, if we're not going to charge you with anything, therefore you have to. The Fifth Amendment of not testifying against yourself is not applicable. Therefore, since we promise you you're not going to be charged with a crime here, we can at the same time require you to give us your source. And if you do not give us your source, you are in contempt of court, and we will send you to jail until you do. And so there have been people in America who have gone to jail, reporters have gone to jail for many, many, many months because they refuse to give up their source. It's kind of a conflict. I mean, you're on the one hand, you have the criminal justice system trying to find a criminal, and so that's why they're demanding, and the reporter trying to protect his reputation, trying to protect his ability to talk to anonymous sources, who does not want to give up this source, or just in so doing actually destroy their own reputation, their own job, perhaps. And so this becomes, both sides. It's not that the judge is crooked. The judge is trying to get the truth, and it's not because the journalist is crooked that he's trying to protect somebody because they're a crook, but he's trying to protect his job and the way he does his job. So that's why because of this conflict, some states have passed laws that said journalists do have the right to protect their sources, but other states do not have that law yet. So it's a basic conflict. One of the things that I wanted to emphasize from you may have noted that he said it's okay to lie to somebody to get them to talk to you. So, for example, he would let me go, I think, back one more. So yeah, he was talking about giving somebody the wrong information. That you say, well, I already know, that you did such and such. Somebody already told me. I already have a source that tells me that you did this and this. And because you consciously give them wrong information, you tell them, I know you did this. Then they feel compelled to correct you. Say, no, I didn't beat him up. Yeah, well, I shot him in the leg, but I didn't beat him up. Whatever. Uh, so you get somebody to tell the truth by making them think that you are going to tell a wrong story about them, even though you really wouldn't do it. They perceive that as a bigger threat than telling the truth. And on the other end, also in protecting, I'm not sure if I put this on a slide. Is that I guess I don't have it on this slide, but another thing that Coppola said was that sometimes he will lie in his report. In this news story he writes, if for example, the person he interviewed is a public figure, and that public figure feels like they're going to be hurt if he's the source, what they agree to is that Coppola will lie and say that they asked that person, and that person would not comment. So his story is actually lying to the public in order to defend his source. He says just the opposite. I asked, the mayor, why this happened, and the mayor refused to comment, for example, because he thinks it will hurt his political career or something. But you actually lie to protect the source to the public. It's something that he says is often done. So going back then to Maribel, he does say be very careful about anonymous sources and off-the-record sources. Make sure that you're using the right vocabulary and that you both understand the same thing. And some people who say, is this off the record, are okay with being anonymous. Anonymous is not the same as being off the record. Anonymous is you're on the record, but I just don't tell your name. Off the record is I'm not going to tell anybody else what you said unless and even then you make sure they understand that if you find another source, you're going to tell what they told you, but you're going to find another source. He Going back to Coppola a second, Coppola says sometimes when they know you have some information, if you're an inexperienced reporter, they may say, I'll tell you this if it's off the record, if you promise not to print it. And they already know you know it. And if you don't clarify, well, if I know it, I'm going to print it. If I already know it, I'm going to print it. I don't want you saying I'm a liar because, if I don't know it, it's off the record. If I already know it, then that's not from you. I have it from somebody else. So if I have information now or in the future from somebody else, I am going to print it. So you never agree to go off the record and never print something, no matter whether you have other sources, because that's just a trap. He said some people actually use you and try to trap you by agreeing to go off the record when you already know something. So you don't want to get caught in that trap. So again, also when you're negotiating with a source, make sure they understand whether you are going to report this as an anonymous source. Unattributed information is more of a generic thing. I don't particularly like it, and that's some cases. I just was blogging about a comment made by one of the top American media yesterday that basically just lying by saying, analysts say this, in implying that all analysts agree with it, which wasn't true at all. There's lots of analysts who disagree with the comment they made as their last sentence in their story was basically a lie, or at least a misdirection. So again, anonymity and off the record are two different things. And in some cases, again, your source may say off the record, and they're satisfied with being anonymous. So you negotiate them up to the being anonymous rather than being off the record totally. But you need to, and it can work the other way around too. If they say, I want to be anonymous, in some cases, they may actually mean off the record. And if you use them, they're going to get killed or somehow be injured because they're the only source that could have given you that information. And so you also have to make sure they understand that if they're anonymous, you are using the information, and you have to make some description of them, and you might have to negotiate how do I describe you? If I go anonymous, I'm going to use what you're telling me. How do I describe you to keep you from being in trouble? And so it gets tricky. You have to make sure that you both understand the terms of your agreement, so to speak. Sorry, I don't have the audio on this, and I don't have all the details, but one of the most challenging stories he said was that police officials were rigging the police in order to be promoted in America have to pass exams at each level to become an officer, to become a lieutenant, for example, become a captain, to become a detective. They have tests for those. And anyway, he was able to reveal that people were basically giving the answers to some of their friends and stuff. So that was one of his stories. That was very difficult to get the information out because people obviously were trying to hide that. And I don't think we need this one. So actually the quiz, well, you have more than enough time. Whenever you open it, you're going to have, I think, there's only 8 questions, I believe. So I think I gave you 9 minutes. So you have more than 9 minutes left. So whenever you open it, you have 9 minutes, or whatever that is, whatever I decided on. So yeah, you can open it now and do that if you want to.